My name is Lauren Patrick, and today I'll be presenting some of my work from when I was a PhD student at Yale University on local and distributed cortical markers of effort expenditure during sustained goal pursuit. So while we've learned foundational insights about how individuals make decisions and pursue goals through binary forced choice decision-making paradigms, traditional choice paradigms aren't able to capture the continuous reevaluation necessary for sustained goal pursuit. If we only measure the initial choice of, for instance, the path on the left or the path on the right, we can't know whether and at what point an individual would have changed courses once realizing, for instance, that the path on the right adds additional miles to the hike. Understanding continuous reevaluation necessitates developing dynamic naturalistic tasks. However, it's important that when developing more naturalistic tasks, we're also isolating each of the component processes in order to unravel the mechanisms underlying the processes. So, in the case of physical effort, it's possible that in choosing the path on the right, you're not only choosing a more effortful option in the short term, but also changing the amount of time the hike will take and even the rewards throughout the hike, such as mountain vistas. As the previous example illustrates, willingness to exert effort is a complex process necessitating the balancing of benefits or reward and costs through information processing, cost-benefit evaluation, and action execution. And this can be anything from the scale of seconds to years. And because of this multifaceted process, in this work, I use a network perspective with the goal of understanding how large-scale networks contribute to complex cognitive processes such as sustained effortful goal pursuit. While the networks pictured here were originally derived from resting state data, they've been implicated in diverse cognitive processes. In the work I'm presenting today, we were particularly interested in default network, which encompasses canonical reward circuitry, and frontoparietal network, which is implicated in goal selection, response selection, and performance monitoring. So in this line of work, we're interested in better understanding which brain systems support willingness to exert effort during the pursuit of desired goals. And in order to begin to gain traction on this question, we have to design paradigms that mirror these actions in the real world. So in order to examine this question, I developed a novel task, the willingness to exert physical effort, or WePhys task. This task has two components. The first is the practice phase, which is also when we titrate to an individual's ability to exert effort, in this case, right index finger button pressing. Individuals are instructed to practice pressing the button as many times as possible within the 15-second period allotted for effort expenditure, and this is intentionally fixed. We take the average number of presses in the latter 3 of 4 practice trials and build a distribution of required effort in the task from that value. So in the bottom right plot, you can see the individual's average number of presses or titrated value is at 0 with a distribution of required effort surrounding that. In the main portion of the task, participants are instructed to press a button as many times as they would like to increase the likelihood of receiving reward or avoiding punishment on a series of trials. There are reward and punishment blocks, and participants are not told how many button presses they would need to complete in order to receive a reward or avoid punishment on any given trial. At the end of the trial, they're given feedback about whether they received the reward or avoided punishment depending on the condition. Prior work suggests that activity and ventral aspects of NPFC tracks the value of continuing to wait for a reward in a given environment, but the role of NPFC in scaling effort expenditure in uncertain environments remains unclear. To examine the neural correlates of scaling effort expenditure, we computed the amplitude modulated signal based on trial level effort expenditure. We conducted a whole brain ANCOVA on the effort amplitude modulated signal, examining time, condition, and continuous task earnings. Highlighting a role for the NPFC in capturing trial-to-trial level variability in physical effort expenditure during dynamic goal pursuit, a significant interaction between time, condition, and total earnings was observed within ventral NPFC. Using the time courses, we were interested in decomposing the direction of these effects. Follow-up one-way ANOVAs were conducted on the MPFC ROI, examining condition, and again, this is reward or punishment, overall task earnings in a continuous manner, though here it's presented as a median split for visualization purposes, and time. First, MPFC showed increased bold response for reward relative to punishment blocks. These analyses also revealed increased reward block MPFC response relative to the punishment condition during effort expenditure. Further, we observed a positive relationship between total participant task earnings and trial level MPFC response during periods of active effort expenditure. Of note, there was no main effect of time in this portion of MPFC. Together, these results indicate a role for MPFC in successful goal pursuit in contexts where effort requirements are uncertain, varying with the task earnings and incentive context. Next, we wanted to look at whether effort signals are present during feedback in the absence of information about the amount of effort required to obtain an outcome, with a particular focus on how these representations are distributed in large-scale networks. We used a searchlight analysis with a radius of 3 and support vector regression, or SVR. In searchlight SVR, a group of voxels, in this case a cube, is analyzed rather than a single voxel. There's evidence that this approach provides greater sensitivity and specificity than mass univariate analyses, with generally complementary results. For each cube of voxels, we trained a model based on z-scored trial-level effort expenditure on 90% of the data. Then in the held-out data, we computed the correlation between actual effort expenditure and predicted effort expenditure on those trials. This process is then repeated 10 times where new models are trained and tested, and the performance is averaged across all folds. And using the Searchlight SVR approach, we found that prior effort expenditure could be decoded at the point of reward feedback. Particularly at the group level, previously expended effort could be significantly decoded from clusters and aspects of medial and lateral prefrontal cortices, as well as the parietal lobe. Decoding was specific to the reward condition, suggesting that while behavioral performance between reward and punishment conditions was similar, the neural circuitry representing prior effort costs may vary depending on the task environment. As I mentioned previously, we've gained much of our knowledge about willingness to exert effort through analyses that highlight discrete regions. However, these cortical territories are embedded in a circuit architecture. The brain is a system supported by spatially distributed networks. And in traditional whole brain fMRI analyses, significance in one place doesn't necessarily indicate it's significantly different from other regions in the brain. So because the planning and execution of physical effort during goal pursuit relies on a diverse set of executive functioning, attention, reward, and motor systems, yet we know little about the brain regions that directly underlie dynamic effort computations, we were interested in looking at our decoding analyses at the network level. To better characterize the spatial distribution of effort decoding across the cortical sheet, we assessed the searchlight accuracy within each of 200 parcels from 7 large-scale brain networks as derived through the cortical parcellation of Schaefer and colleagues. Decoding accuracy within the boundary of each network was averaged across parcels and compared. In the present set of searchlight analyses, the observed effort signals displayed a non-uniform distribution across cortical networks. And in particular, decoding accuracy was greatest in heteromodal association cortex, including aspects of lateral prefrontal cortex, the temporal parietal junction, and the frontal pole, and relatively less pronounced in unimodal sensory and motor, as well as orbital frontal cortices. Consistent with this spatial pattern, frontoparietal as well as dorsal and ventral attention networks demonstrated a high level of decoding accuracy, where the limbic, somatomotor, and visual systems exhibited the lowest accuracy. Interestingly, despite the differences in decoding accuracy by network, after running permutation testing, we found that decoding accuracy in each network was significantly different from 0, highlighting that we may be missing important signal related to cognitive processes by using traditional univariate and cluster-based approaches. So in this study, we found ventral MPFC activity tracks trial level effortful persistence as a function of time, monetary incentives, and eventual task earnings. Subsequent feedback responses in frontoparietal and dorsal attention networks preferentially reflect prior trial level effort expenditure, and signals related to prior effort expenditure can be decoded from large-scale distributed brain networks. I would like to thank the Holmes Lab at Yale for supporting this work, as well as funding from the FAS Discovery Fund at Yale. Thank you for your attention.